Visual novels, or eroge, defined an era in the Japanese entertainment industry, especially during the 2000s when the medium reached its peak. Legendary stories were born in that decade, stories that have never been forgotten, and stories that would go on to influence massive works in the future. Visual novels shaped, marked, and helped transform Japanese media into what it is today, from games to anime to manga. But all those mediums moved forward, and visual novels stayed behind. For football fans, they became a Manchester United medium, which brings us to the question everyone keeps asking. Is the visual novel medium dead? Is it actually dying? In this video, we are going to find out why, and trust me, the answer is far more interesting and far more complex than you might think, because it's a multifaceted one. The Prince presents a question: are visual novels dead? So first, what is a visual novel? A visual novel is a form of digital interactive fiction, like reading an interactive book. They are very text-heavy, very narrative-driven. You read, make choices, follow branches, and see character sprites or backgrounds. Many visual novels are what we call eroge, adult games, or bishoujo games, romance-focused works with anime-style characters. Because visual novels rely more on narrative than complex mechanics, their production cost can be relatively low. Small teams, affordable artwork, and scripting compared to big AAA titles. That low barrier to entry is part of why the medium flourished, especially in the 90s and 2000s. Visual novel roots go back to Japanese PC gaming in the 80s and 90s. It all started there. One of the earliest influential works was Dokusei by Elf in 1992, a school romance dating sim type game. Over time, studios such as Leaf released titles like Shizuku and Kizuato in 1996 and Two Heart in 1997, which helped crystallize what we now think of as the visual novel template: reading, branching, decisions, character roots. Leaf also helped create Utawarerumono, a huge success in the 2000s. Remember this name, it will be important later. By the late 90s and early 2000s, the medium exploded with creativity. Key, one of the most beloved visual novel companies, released Canon in 1999, and in the early 2000s, the so-called golden age of visual novels arrived. Big names and legendary titles emerged. Fate Stay Night by Type Moon, which sold over 750,000 copies across platforms. In a single year, 2004, we had Feito, Higurashi, Kuranado, Ace Attorney, Remember 11, Ransu 6, Planetarian. Back in 2009, notable titles include Amagami, Asairo, Dice Ire, Umineko, Steins Gate, Magikoi, Muramasa, Boulder Sky. Even in the 2010, the scene was spectacular. There were so many visual novels being released that it was possible to have a visual novel of the year category with dozens of genuinely great candidates, many of which are now considered classics. Well, there are a lot of reasons why this era stood out. First, the medium nurtured talent. Key is one of the most beloved visual novel companies, known for creating emotional nakige games, stories designed to make players cry. Its co-founder and main creative force, Jun Maeda, became legendary for works like Kanon, Air, and Clannad, and later influenced even anime like Anohana. Type Moon, founded by Kinoko Nas and Takashi Takeuchi, created the iconic Fate Stay Night, a series that would grow into a massive multimedia franchise, blending deep storytelling with complex characters. 07th expansion, led by Ryukishi07, is famous for Higurashi and Umineko, both classics in visual novel and even with famous anime adaptations that blew up in the 2000s. Nitro Plus, with standout creators like Urobuchi Gen, produced darker, more mature titles like Sayanota and Muramasa, very unique and legendary titles. Ubisoft, August, many others. Even Makoto Shinkai, the creator of Kimi no Nawa and one of the biggest contemporary successes in anime film, has also been part of this industry, having created opening animations for the developer Minori. Together, these studios are just a few of the many, and they stars who defined the golden era of visual novels, turning the medium into a launchpad for creative talent and unforgettable stories. Okay, next reason: creative freedom and low barriers. Because development costs were low, small teams could take risks. That means weird, niche stories could be told, free of constraints. The strength of visual novels has always been artistic freedom. Also, the graphics were beautiful. I mean, pay attention, in the early 2000s, people were playing Final Fantasy VII, full of polygons, but at the same time you could play Canon, which, with all respect to Final Fantasy VII, was clearly more pleasing to a casual audience. People care about the beautiful. Visual novels had extremely clean sprites, detailed backgrounds, gorgeous CGs, and professional character design because the focus was static art, something technology at the time could render in high quality. For many people, especially in Japan, VNs were the most accessible way to see beautiful art, high-resolution anime, and well-drawn characters, something regular games couldn't offer yet. In the mid-2000s, the Japanese eroge market was huge. According to industry sources, it reached around 35 billion yen annual revenue. VNs compete directly with anime, and sometimes were even more beautiful. And then came the problem. Do you know why the problem arrived? Because the medium waited for the problem to come to it, instead of creating the next evolution itself. And what was the problem? Well, I tell you, it was the moment the industry stood still, and then it just fell. In 2006, eroge sales began to decline. The numbers suggest that many newer companies struggle to make enough revenue to justify their projects, especially given fixed production costs. The eroge market contracted from around 35 billion yen annual revenue at its peak to around 24 billion by 2011. Still a large number, and classic titles were still being released, but the industry itself was noticing the decline, and the role runs much deeper. Talent is leaving. Writers, artists, composers who once saw visual novels as the pinnacle of creative expression have moved on. Why? We can't say for sure. I haven't interviewed them, but we can deduce. Visual novels were no longer the focus of Japanese entertainment. Anime was getting stronger, games were improving graphically, light novels were booming, and audiences were migrating toward media that better suited their needs. Meanwhile, eroge was largely stagnant. Same roots, same story structures, similar art. They can feel daunting to read, and in Japan, they are still quite expensive compared to, say, a light novel you can grab and read on the train, or an anime you can stream anywhere, thanks to the dozens of streaming services available. And of course, there are gacha games you can just play on your phone anytime. Let's see some examples of talent migration. Gen Urobuchi, one of the most memorable VN writers, did his last VN work in 2009 and then left the medium. 2 years later, he created Madoka Magica, revolutionizing the mahou shoujo genre in anime and overall. And 1 year after that, Psychopass. Tomose Shunkaku, once active in eroge, is now the official artist for Yojitsu, aka Classroom of the Elite, and hasn't drawn for an eroge in over 10 years. Jun Maeda, co-founder of Ki, went into gacha games. Makoto Shinkai himself, who never made another visual novel opening again, just like Urobuchigen, disappeared from that scene after 2009. So we reached a point where the biggest stars no longer think about VNs and don't even plan to return. New talent rarely enters the eroge industry anymore. Why would they, when anime, manga, aliens, and gacha games offer more money and more stability? So the VN industry today relies on a small survival class of creators who love the medium enough to stay. And it's interesting to note because the collapse is systemic. Some of the most foundational VN companies begin to falter or stop releasing major titles. Works hasn't released anything in 5 years. Alisoft, creators of Runs, last major title was in 2020. Core Talent reportedly left. Runs itself ended in 2018. August hasn't released anything since 2019. Mage, creators of Steins Gate, entered financial insolvency with roughly 630 million yen in losses. Light, creators of Dice Ire, literally ended in 2019. Elf itself, which I mentioned earlier, ended its activities in 2015, 10 years ago. Even a revolutionary company that changed what visual novels are ended up closing its doors. These are not small players, and these are just a few examples. When icons slow down or disappear, it signals trouble. Far fewer meaningful VN releases now than 10, 15 years ago, because visual novels are no longer mainstream. Fewer new creators emerge. A medium that once nurtured young writers and artists is no longer seen as a gateway. Economically, talent migrates naturally. Anime, games, and other media pay better. And I was already forgetting, but luckily I remembered in time to talk about Tanezaki Atsumi, a voice actress who has played numerous roles in eroge, but thanks to her great talent in voice acting, she started getting invited to more and more roles in anime and gacha games. Today, she's the voice actress of Frieren herself, and she's been working less and less in the visual novel medium. And considering that she got married in October 2023, I doubt she will ever take on any major role as a voice actress in an eroge again. Not to mention that many visual novels are still released only in Japanese, and it often takes years before an official English or other language version becomes available, if one comes at all. This is a big barrier for global audiences and makes it hard for VNs to reach new fans outside Japan. Now we reach the core question. Why then do charts sometimes show that the visual novel market is actually growing every year? Because if you search and look at these statistics, the visual novel industry actually seems to be growing every year, earning billions of yen, even with these classic companies going bankrupt. How confusing. But I'm glad you asked. This is the most important part of the video. The answer is simple. There is a difference between visual novels and eroge. 98% of people watching this video, maybe more, love the roots of visual novels, eroge, bishoujo games, the classic style. That side is declining. The traditional, purely narrative, purely to the Japanese eroge scene shows dropping sales, shrinking budgets, fewer standout titles, fewer new creators, fewer releases than 15 years ago. That's one side. The other side, the modern concept of a visual novel includes almost anything. Reports counting visual novel games now often include hybrid or narrative gacha titles. Fate Grand Order, a story segments in visual novel style, billions in revenue. Project Sekai, which I made a video last week, list on VNDB. Tears of Themis, Horrorverse, VN mechanics. So while traditional eroge VNs are collapsing, the broader VN market is actually growing. Hybrids, mobile titles, and narrative games are absorbing the audience. One of the biggest VN titles of the last decade in sales, I told you to remember, Utaru Mono. Its sequels became one of the best-selling visual novels of the 2010s. Not just because of their stories, but because they weren't purely VNs. They were hybrids, JRPGs fused with visual novel storytelling, a linear story, no branches, engaged in strategic, turn-based battles while still being immersed in long, story-driven narratives. This combination of interactive gameplay and deep storytelling exemplifies how classic VN studios evolved to stay relevant, appealing to both traditional VN fans and new audiences seeking gameplay depth. And that brings us to Manosaba, Mahou Shoujo no Majo Saiban. Released this year of 2025, it's the first truly big new IP in years. Like Utaru Mono, it's interactive and engaging. It sold over 200,000 copies, a phenomenon in a genre supposedly dying. Critically, Manosaba has been widely praised. It's a story, a dark, psychological witch trial death game, balances tension, mystery, and character development. You can really see how it's a unique, standout story with really interesting mystery mechanics, engaging and let you participate in courtroom style trials that actually shape the story. I could make an entire video just about Manosaba, explaining how relevant this title is and how it could continue to be for years to come. In fact, the producers are already working quickly on a Western release due to the huge success the game has had in Japan and its extremely high Steam ratings. Many Japanese YouTubers are playing it, and it deserves the attention because it's truly a fresh, unique experience. Manosaba shows what a game looks like when it is able to massively use its visual novel elements and the potential that these mechanics have. It shows not just what a visual novel is, but what it should be. A game where your choices truly matter, just like in Kara no Shoujo. Now, let's talk about gachas. The Fate franchise today is dominated by Fate Grand Order, a gacha game making billions, yet the story is delivered in VN format. Other examples, like I said, are all VN structured. Today, you literally don't need to play Blue Archive or Project Sekai. You can just create an account, enter the game, and just read the story without even playing the game. So while eroge and bishoujo games decline, VN style games boom. But talking is easy, right? It's not like tiny eroge studios surviving on 2D sprites sliding left and right can suddenly build a hybrid game. Most barely had the budget to animate a blinking expression. Visual novels in a nutshell. They were never built to compete with modern production pipelines, RPG mechanics, tactical combat engines, 3D assets, gacha systems, live service updates. They were built to tell stories, draw beautiful characters, and release a product every year or two. So when hybrids came, the only way to survive, most couldn't follow. Not due to lack of creativity, but lack of money, manpower, and ecosystem. And there's FrontWing, the company behind Grisaya no Kajitsu, and their market strategy, which is, well, quite interesting. FrontWing is one of the few classic visual novel studios that has successfully adapted to the modern era. They didn't get stuck only making eroge. Instead, they've expanded into all-age VNs, hybrid games, and more mainstream narrative-driven titles, reaching beyond the traditional adult VN audience. Their localization efforts show a clear intention to reach global audiences. Unlike many other VN companies that rely solely on the Japanese market, FrontWing ensures that their major titles are localized and released internationally, helping them expand their revenue and global recognition. Even today, they are producing high-quality, story-driven visual novels. Games like Ginka or Atri demonstrate that narrative and design remain at the core of what they do. A big reason they can do this is corporate backing. FrontWing attracted investment because it already has successful visual novels and strong IPs like the Grisaya series. These are valuable for making anime, merchandise, and other media. Big companies like Bushiroad and Good Smile saw FrontWing as a studio whose games and characters could be expanded into profitable multimedia projects. In short, FrontWing had IPs that could make money beyond visual novels. Most Japanese VN studios make niche titles that don't expand outside the VN market. FrontWing has used this backing wisely. Their localization efforts show a clear intention to reach global audiences. Unlike many other VN companies that rely solely on the Japanese market, FrontWing ensures that their major titles are localized and released internationally, helping them expand their revenue and global recognition. And because of that, we ended up getting anime like Grisaya Phantom Trigger and Atri, even though anime adaptations of visual novels are rare nowadays. They are proof that there is still a viable future for visual novel style games, but maybe not if you stick to the traditional eroge only model. Their success suggests that a hybrid modern VN business model combining global reach, narrative depth, and gameplay innovation can work. In my personal experience, and since we are already here, I want to share a bit of my story. The first time I've ever played a visual novel was in 2017. It was Shuffle by Novel, which by the way has some amazing opening for its VNs, including the legendary opening of Oretsuba. I thought it was magical to be able to play a game where you have the freedom to decide the protagonist's future, or your own if you are self-inserting, shaping your very own story. In 2018, I went back to reading VNs more frequently, and that's when I started tackling more ambitious titles like Rewrite and Umineko. But it was in 2019 and 2020 that my golden era with visual novels truly began. I devoured them every single day of the year, even learned Japanese for that. I read many of them, until one day, after consuming so much, I looked back and realized everything I had read had been released 5, 10, 15 years ago, and almost nothing was new. And when that hit me, I noticed something else. Nothing left in the market really interested me anymore. The industry had become scarce of stories as unique as the ones from the past, and since it's a niche medium, there were few or sometimes no people to talk to about the stories I was reading. It became lonely. That's when I personally decided that visual novels were no longer a medium for me to stay in or make my main focus. Instead, I needed to explore new journeys. And honestly, that could have been a better decision, because thanks to it, I started playing many other games and discovered what are now my favorite games of all time, so it was worth it. However, I will remain grateful to this medium until the last day of my life, because it changed my life and the way I think. Literally, there is the Prince before visual novels and the Prince after visual novels. Today, the way I analyze things on this channel, the way I write scripts for my videos, the way I see the world, the way I adore poetry, nature, immersion, and prefer stories with depth and meaning instead of just entertainment, all of that is thanks to visual novels and those magical 2 years I lived with them every single day. So, just like Skadi himself said at the beginning of this video, eroge can't die, but if it wants to escape this situation, then at the very least, it has to transform and evolve into something that preserves its essence. So, what can we really say about the state of visual novels today? The truth is twofold. On one hand, the traditional visual novel, the pure eroge, bishoujo games, and classic Japanese 2D narrative style is clearly in decline. Sales are dropping, foundational companies are closing or slowing down, and the talented writers, artists, and composers who made the golden age so special have moved on to anime, games, and gacha projects. The industry that once nurtured new talent is no longer a launching pad. In that sense, the roots of visual novels are dying. But on the other hand, the format itself, the concept of a story-driven, choice-based, interactive narrative is far from dead. It has migrated into hybrid games, mobile gacha titles, JRPG VN fusions like Utaru Mono, and new hits like Manosaba. These games retain the core DNA of visual novels, branching narratives, character-driven storytelling, interactive engagement, while adapting to the taste and technologies of today's global audience. In fact, some of these hybrids are selling millions and generating billions in revenue. So what's the final answer? Are visual novels dying? That's why I say the answer would be so interesting and multifaceted. In the end, it really comes down to your own perspective. What do you value more? The roots of visual novels or visual novels as a medium in general? And out of the all possible answers we can give based on everything I've presented in this video, one thing is certain: visual novels are transforming, for better or for worse, far from their traditional roots. The roots are fading, but the tree has grown into entirely new branches. Visual novels as a storytelling medium are very much alive, just not in the way we grew up loving them. Thank you for watching this video until the end. I'm not claiming to be the ultimate authority on anything. Everything I said here comes from my own opinion and perspective based on what I've observed and experienced over the years I've spent with visual novels. But I really want to hear your thoughts. Do you genuinely believe that visual novels are dying and aren't what they used to be? Or do you think this is all just overthinking and that VNs have actually never been better? I'd love to know your opinion in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you liked. With that, I close the curtains and the showdown.